So I want to say thanks to Lee this morning, who asked me recently to talk about clinging, which is what we're going to talk about this morning. And I really enjoyed getting into this topic and digging into it because there's more nuance there than I'm usually was thinking about until I started putting this together. So thank you, Lee. Anyway, in Buddhism, as you know, the concept of clinging, upadana is the Pali word, is a central theme as we try to understand the roots of our suffering and how we can free ourselves from some of it. And clinging refers to an attachment or grasping to things, to ideas, to relationships, on, driven by the mistaken belief that the tighter we cling, the greater our happiness or security will be. But we know that's not true, even though we may behave as though it were, and most of us do at times. And we know it's not true because all things are impermanent and subject to change, and clinging leads not only to suffering, but perhaps as importantly, also to a distortion of reality, by which I mean seeing things as we wish they were rather than how they actually are, which we often talk about. When we're clinging, we're denying impermanence and we're wishing that it existed, and that's a distortion of reality. But by exploring how clinging manifests in our daily lives and thinking about the practical ways to overcome it, we can start to cultivate things in the direction of greater freedom, greater peace, and greater understanding. Just a reminder, clinging arises from the second of the Four Noble Truths, which identifies craving, tanha in the Pali, as the cause of suffering. And craving is a strong desire for sensory pleasures, existence. It's the act of holding on to these. Clinging is the act of holding on to these desires or solidifying our attachments to them. Clinging is an intensification of craving where we invest both our identity and our emotional well-being into what we desire or fear losing. So in practical terms, and this is where we get down in the weeds a little bit, clinging can take on many forms. The obvious one is we may cling to material possessions, thinking that they define our worth, they're going to bring us permanent happiness, they're going to provide us with ongoing comfort. So we cling there. We cling to things that, we go out and buy something new thinking it's going to define our worth or provide us with constant comfort, and only to find out that's not the case. We cling to relationships, and often we do that not for skillful means, but because we fear loneliness. We fear being alone. We fear rejection. And then we cling to ideas, and this can get to be really complicated and fairly nuanced, but we cling to ideas, opinions, or beliefs, seeing them as essential to who we are and as part of our identity. But in every case, clinging involves a refusal to let go, which is really a resistance when we're doing that to the natural flow of life, because it's an attempt to control or fix what is inherently impermanent. Okay. Clinging is a source of suffering because it is based on the illusion of permanence. Let me say that again. It's really the sort of essence of this discussion. Clinging is a source of suffering because it is based on the illusion of permanence. When we attach ourselves to something, we wish for it to remain the same. We wish for it to bring us continued satisfaction, and it's just not going to happen. But as you know, life is marked by impermanence. Everything we hold on to is subject to change. Our ideas, our possessions, even our relationships. Relationships evolve or they end. Possessions break or they lose their appeal. And even our deepest beliefs can be challenged by new experiences or new input. But when reality fails to meet our expectations, we experience pain, we experience frustration, we experience disappointment. In addition, clinging narrows our perspective. It binds us to this reactive cycle of craving and aversion. We get caught in this loop, this samsara loop, where we're bound to this reactive cycle of craving and aversion. If we cling to the idea of, for example, if we cling to the idea of always being successful, we may fear failure and overwork ourselves in an attempt, which will be unsuccessful, to avoid it. Okay? Or if we expect our efforts to turn out perfectly and cling to that idea, it's probably likely not going to happen and we're going to suffer. Similarly, if we cling to try to cling to fleeting moments of pleasure, we may chase after them compulsively, neglecting the deeper joys of the moment, the deeper joys of contentment and presence. So this is the way clinging keeps us trapped in this cycle of suffering, which prevents us from experiencing what's going on right now and the freedom and the joy that happens from being attuned to what's going on right now. Now, to begin to manage clinging more skillfully, the first step, as always, is to recognize its presence in our lives, when and where it shows up. And once we begin to look at that, it's all over the place. And of course, our mindfulness, our noticing, is essential to this process. When we begin through our practice to pay attention to our thoughts, to our emotions, to our actions, we begin to see all the subtle ways in which we attach ourselves to things. All the subtle ways in which we attach ourselves to things, our thoughts, our opinions, our emotions, our actions. So the practice is really, for instance, when we feel frustrated, to ask ourselves, what am I clinging to in this moment that's causing the frustration? Am I clinging to how I wish things were because they're not that way? Am I clinging to an idea that's just not standing up to scrutiny? What am I clinging to in this moment that's causing me frustration? Am I holding on to a desire for things to be a certain way and they're not happening? Oh, that's an insight. I can go with that. Or when we feel anxious, we might reflect, am I clinging to an outcome or fearing the loss of something I value? Is that why I'm anxious? What am I clinging to here that is making me anxious? What am I afraid of losing that I'm clinging to? Or when we feel depressed, are we clinging to an idea of how we should be, or clinging to an idea that we're somehow falling short of some arbitrary yardstick? Each of these inquiries and others like them can lead us into a greater understanding of our self-created suffering. Remember, the Buddha taught that most of our suffering originates internally. It's of our own making. The practice of self-awareness, which we talked about last month, is critical to this path. It's foundational to this path. The practice of self-awareness allows us to see our patterns of clinging that underlie our suffering. Once we begin to bring some mindfulness and some inquiry to them, we bring a sense of curiosity to our clinging rather than judgment or avoidance. We don't tell ourselves we're bad or we're screwed up because we haven't. We're curious about it. Why am I feeling this right now? Why am I feeling frustrated? Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I feeling down? Letting go is one of the most powerful antidotes to clinging, as the Buddha taught. It's often referred to as non-attachment, renunciation, or relinquishment. The Pali word is nikakama. It is related to right intention. This letting go is related to right intention on the Eightfold Path. But letting go in this context does not mean we become indifferent or detached from life. It means we engage fully with the world while recognizing and accepting, especially at a gut level, the impermanent nature, and how not clinging to outcomes is really letting go. This is a critically important idea in this practice of non-clinging. Our practical way to cultivate letting go is through our meditation, because in meditation we practice observing our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings without attaching to them. We watch them arise, we watch them pass away, but we don't reach in there and cling to them and grab onto them. If a thought arises, we notice it, we let it pass, just as we would watch a leaf floating along on the stream. And over time, doing this with our regular sitting practice, we develop a sense of spaciousness around all this stuff that we used to cling to. We develop equanimity about not getting hooked about all this stuff we used to cling to, which allows us to respond to life with greater freedom and wisdom. And then another aspect of clinging, of non-clinging and letting go, is the practice of generosity. This directly counters the tendency to cling. By giving freely, whether it's of our time, of our friendliness, of our resources, of our kindness, we begin to loosen the grip on our possessions. We begin to loosen the ego grip on the ego's needs, and we cultivate and have gratitude for the abundance that exists in our lives. It's a powerful antidote to clinging. Generosity reminds us that true happiness comes from not holding on to things, but from sharing things and connecting with others. And then finally, impermanence, as we talked about a few minutes ago, reflecting on that helps us release our attachments. When we truly embrace the law of impermanence, by contemplating the transient nature of all things, we learn to appreciate them while they're there without having to cling to them. You know, I've talked in the past about watching beautiful sunsets and being so concerned about it ending the experience, the full joy of the experience. But if I understand impermanence, I appreciate the sunset while it's there, and also understand that it's going to go away in a few minutes. It's like savoring a beautiful moment without it needing to last forever. We accept that. Or we cherish a relationship in our lives without focusing on its eventual end or transformation. When we're so caught up in worrying about it being over, we miss the opportunity to fully savor it. So this is not the freedom. Non-clinging is not the freedom of getting everything we want. It is the freedom of no longer being prisoners of our desires and our fears. Unchecked, our desires and our fears will imprison us. But instead, we come to see that happiness is not found in clinging to external things, to our thoughts, to our values, our beliefs. It's embracing the present moment with openness and gratitude. And in the Buddhist path, ultimately, as he taught, this freedom culminates in a state of liberation from suffering. While this ultimate goal feels distant, may feel distant, every moment of letting go brings us closer to that freedom. Each time we release our attachments, even little ways, we taste a bit of that peace. We taste a bit of the clarity that comes from living in harmony with the truth of impermanence. It is everywhere impermanence in our lives. We ignore it at our peril. But of course we know clinging is a natural human tendency. I mean, it has to do with survival needs. But if we don't manage it skillfully and don't see it in the context of impermanence, it is the root of so much of our suffering. When we begin to recognize how clinging shows up in our lives, and we practice mindfulness, we practice letting go, we practice generosity, we practice reflecting on impermanence, we begin to free ourselves gradually from its grip. And in doing so, we discover that our life, as I said, is not bound by fear. It is grounded in wisdom and compassion and joy. Letting go is not about giving up on life. It is about embracing life fully, without holding it too tightly. We end up trying to choke it. We find that peace comes from living in alignment with impermanence and the ever-changing nature of reality. So those are some thoughts this morning on clinging.